We already had a question about sustainability. Would you like to hear that question repeated?
Yeah, I think people are looking for projects that can be sustained. So that's why I was interested in the fact that you're working on curriculum that could be dispersed to other places and that it's going to be taught anyway. And I think that's really, you have to figure out what your project, how your project can be sustainable. And that's just that's my takeaway. That I think everyone here can try to imagine. It's not always easy. My project isn't easily sustainable without continued funding.
Since you asked about that, let me just comment that I think you're exactly right. Although I would say that I would put it in some ways under breadth of impact. And one issue of breadth is how many places will be affected by what you do. I know there's longevity of the impact. And so, for instance, in our project I described, we're really aimed at developing a national model. The project includes dissemination, which will include some sort of online resource which will be accessed by people around the country. And we'll talk present not only certain kinds of results and strategies that we use, but also the process we use so people can adapt it to their own situations. I think it points excellent.
If I could just add something, I think that's exactly right. And one of our goals is to make sure that when we think about faculty development, it's everywhere. And it's expensive. And it's not assessed. And something that's ubiquitous, expensive, and unassessed is vulnerable. So what we're hoping to do is demonstrate that these things do matter and that there are better and worse ways to deliver them. And the better ways are certainly good bargains, good values for institutions.
Yes. Two-part question. What is your advice about establishing those partnerships? Words of caution? How have you gotten burned? What's been harder to navigate in terms of IRBs and ORSPs at both places? Because I'm looking at developing a partnership with 3 universities, and I have to retain 51%, or my university's not going to take their 46.3% off the top. Advice?
I didn't have to deal with IRBs for our particular project, so although I have cross-collaborative work that I already mentioned, maybe somebody else can speak to the research aspect of that.
You can leave the IRB part off. Were there any snafus or problems with getting?
Yeah, but we originally were going to partner with a different institution, and it turned out that the person who was kind of leading on that end was unable to deliver what was needed. And so we switched at the last minute. So one thing I would say is if you're going to go with partners, try to find out early whether they're actually going to be productive. Don't wait until the last minute.
I agree. We're a small private institution, and our partners are a grant-funded institution and an R1. So we have differences of kind as well as degree, and just merging the different administrative models and the different budgeting models ended up being a lot more complicated than we expected. And then once we got the grant, the foundation insisted on paying it all to my institution, which means we have to be the bank. Who knew? So it's been, when Linda said it's a lot of administrative time, that's a very, very polite way of putting it.
IRB has just been the bane of my existence. And it really, finally getting the dean behind it and flogging the IRB people to put things through on a rush basis is the only way we've been able to just keep up with it. And it's not because it had to be, it's not because it was delayed, it's just because it has to go through so many stages with so many institutions that if it follows the normal IRB pace, we'll never get to the field testing stage. So this was, I mean, I've done a gazillion projects with IRB, but nothing this big. And the bigger it is, the more complicated
I wonder if we might ask Chuck to respond just from the point of view of international research collaboration between institutions in different countries.
Well, most of my experience with cooperative projects has been with Latin America. I think, well, first, in general, you need to be aware of the efficiency and work habits of your partners and whether they're going to deliver, or in what way they deliver, and how you can keep them, keep the whole project moving along. And I don't want to be stereotypical about Latin America, and there's some very efficient people, but there are, as here, other people that are very slow to answer email. There are misunderstandings, and I think internationally that exacerbates that problem. But so you have to really assess that all out before you go into work with a group, and then often, if you're the lead, you do have to take leadership to keep things moving along and make people aware that they have gotten themselves into a set of obligations which need to be met in a timely way.
Yes.
First, I want to say thank you all for providing such a rich and interesting array of grants. I think it's important to understand, especially for humanities faculty who aren't used to working with grant structures, to understand not only what's required, because it's very complicated, but also how it can differ across agencies. The second thing I want to say is I've been working for the last 3 years. We just submitted our final report last week for a $150,000 grant that was a chemistry grant for NSF. And it was a good grant, very interesting. But a couple of things that I learned that I didn't hear you guys say that I think it might be useful for the audience to know. A very well-written grant goes a long way. It has to be good. It has to be well conceived. It has to be well written. It can't have any fluff in it. I mean, it really has to be. We probably spent 6 or 8 months writing the grant. It went through 15 or 20 eyes, and it went through my eyes maybe 5 or 10 times. And it's important. I'm sure you guys would agree with that. The second thing that I would suggest is that I want to echo the administrative responsibilities. I was working with colleagues who've done grants before, and that was a huge difference for me, a very important difference for me. I never would have been able to receive the grant had I not worked with folks who already knew how to do it, because there's a specific style and a specific set of citations and expectations. So what I would love to see, I don't know if you guys would be willing to do it, but I'd love to see your panel post copies of your grants somewhere, so that those of us who are out here and trying to apply for additional grants have good models of successful grants to use to apply to.
Let me just speak to that. Also, when I've been fortunate enough to be successful with several grants, and in many cases what I've done is looked at projects that were recently funded, found a project that was similar to what I was proposing, and said, you know, I'd find four or five of them, and I'd email all those people and say, could you send me a copy of your grant? And I got, you know, about 40%, you know, where I'd have at least 1 or 2 models to look off of. So, and I've had people do the same thing for me. So I think that's excellent advice. And yes, I do hope to get some, as part of the research committee's activities, to get some of these grants available so that people do have models.
I just, if I could go back to I'm slow thinking today. The other thing that, again, it's what Carol mentioned in the U.S. is even worse when you're dealing instead internationally. The structure of institutions and the politics of institutions just are so different that so it's not just that the individual partners you have to work well with, but you also have to have a great tolerance for the kind of delays and difficulties that are created by their institutional situation.
Thank you, Jeff, for asking the questions you did, and I want to make a related point that Joanna brought up in her presentation, and that's reviewer feedback. As Cheryl said, the guidelines for proposals tend to be very strict. You only have so many words or so many pages, and often you're directed to you have to funnel your project into categories that the institution cares about and has its own definitions for. So as writing teachers, we can do that. We can figure out the audience, we can figure out the lingo, but you never can say everything you need to say. And so one of the things I think that really helped us land our grant was that we were tantalizing enough to get hit hard by reviewers on certain features. And then we had unlimited space to respond. And we could provide additional references, and we could, do all kinds of things that there was no room for in the original proposal. And I'm sure that saved us.
The NEH puts lots of sample winning proposals on their website. So go and look if you're interested in NEH in particular. I mean, like Chuck showed, they have like 17 different, options. But what I did is downloaded some of the more successful ones, and Jim Rodolfo and Bill Markavitson had just gotten one, and so I went and looked up at theirs because I wanted to see what they were doing and how I could model. I knew it wasn't just the same old sort of literature digitization project.
For my grant, the process went through several committees that the project director pushed it through. So it went through kind of like a preliminary, okay, go on and pursue this further committee, and then it went to a secondary committee, a third committee. I think it was about the fourth committee that was one that actually approved the grant, and each of them had feedback and questions, and very specific questions that allowed us to build what we needed into it, which was very, 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 very useful. But that might be peculiar to the Gates Foundation. I'm not sure that other